foster-pusey.
Dr. Lambert Innis.
Jerry McDaniel.
Errol Mackenzie.
Chris Tufton.
It's Dr. David Hansen.
It's Carl Bruce.
Rita Walker. Russ.
Grantley Stevenson.
Mary Clark.
Evan Duggan.
Newt James.
Gilbert George Allen.
Raymond George Brooks.
Michael Peart.
Curtis Ward.
Patricia Parkins.
I'm Jean Dixon. I was Jean Clarke when I was a student at Manchester High School.
Euclid Freeman. Nay Chung.
I was involved in the Interschools Christian Fellowship, debating club, school choir. Manchester High was very formative in my development in terms of developing my ability to speak. I was a part of the debating club, developing leadership qualities. I was a part of the prefect body, eventually head girl. I even made my commitment to be a Christian at school through my then form teacher, Miss Lorna Collington. Now Mrs. Lorna Green, who I was very pleased to see this summer.
The school year started in January, so it was January to December. And I remember it was a big thing when we switched over to the school year starting in September. I was actually at school, so that particular year was shortened a bit. I remember that period again because we had a girl who was a very bright girl. She came from Porus and she was spelling bee champion. So the entire school was excited. And it was my introduction to high school because here is where I then realized that, there were some very brilliant children around me. And I had to try and keep up with them because I consider that I was no match for them. The girls were just fantastic from those days. From those days, girls were doing very well.
Sixth form in 1982, I went into Manchester High from Hope Preparatory School in Williamsfield in 1975. It's the year when Freddie McKay won with Big Heel Boot and Calico Pants and whatnot. So that was 1975. It was also the year when we won the Schools Challenge quiz. And that was very exciting and very encouraging because you had a sense you're in a school with a lot of cultural stimulation, a lot of brilliant people, and a very affirming environment. It was also a time when our sports program was a lot more varied. So I remember Mr. Worthington there who taught us rugby. I'm a little sorry that it never sustained rugby because of all of the sports. There's one in which I was most interested, and that was dropped eventually. Rangoon Gunter, of course we dare not call him Rangoon. No, he's dead. I'm not so sure that he can take me on about that. Freddie Gunter, who was a man of great principle, and one thing that everybody who passed through Mr. Gunter would remember is that he'd ask the rhetorical question. Yeah, you weren't expected to answer. It was purely rhetorical. Where is your pride? Where is your dignity? Where is your civic pride? You need to have guts, grit, and gumption. That I'll never ever forget. And when you get out of line and you look at yourself, you say to yourself, why am I doing this? This clearly is not somebody who's shining. It's not somebody who needs to be emulated. And you hear the voice in your head every now and again. He was a very disciplined man and inspired a lot of discipline in you, but he was also a very gentle and warm man.
Attended Manchester High School and graduated with the class of 1966. Back to German days, I had a wonderful experience at school. It was coming from Mile Gully, my family were farmers. I had a chance to go to school at Manchester was a privilege for us in Mile Gully. Not all of my friends went to school, so I went and I, had some challenges, but in the end I, achieved a lot of what we had set out to achieve. And I'm very happy with my years at Manchester High School.
I spent 7 years at Manchester High School from first form back in September 1980 straight through to 6A, which of course, 2 years after fifth form. So all of my high school education was conducted at Manchester High School. Okay. I think that those were some of the best years of my life, frankly speaking, in that I had an excellent group of batchmates, made some friends that have turned out to this point to be friends for life. Had a good group of teachers, many of whom are still there, people like Mrs. Kolai and so on, who really helped to guide me, not just academically, but also in terms of advice and so on. In a sense, they were like your parents. And it was, in a sense, an age of innocence, in that you were allowed the freedom to enjoy yourself while you worked hard and made good friends. And I used to look forward to going to school because of the environment. I enjoyed it. There were ups and downs, obviously. There were times when you got into trouble. And there were times when you were on show, as an example. And I think I've seen both of those. And at the end of it all, I think I got the foundation that was necessary to allow me to move on to college, to pursue 3 degrees, one in Jamaica, the others in North America and Europe. And I attribute a substantial part of that grounding to what I got from Manchester High School, and so I'm very grateful.
I attended Manchester High School from 1979 to 1982. I actually came to Manchester High in 4th form. I was a transfer student from Cornwall College. No doubt, Mr. Gunter was probably the most outstanding influence at Manchester High School at the time I went there. He was a very strict disciplinarian, but under the quiet, he did very quiet work with some of the most troublesome students. I know, for example, that there was a particular boy who was very troublesome in the school, but his home background was not very good. And I know for a fact that Mr. Gunter would take that boy out quietly and buy him school uniforms to go to school. And very few people knew about that. I mean, at that time, you didn't have the sort of assistance you can now get through some of the government-sponsored funds.
Manchester in 1980, and at that time the school population was not the way it was now, so all of us would meet in the auditorium, what we call the bottom hall, and everybody would have a great time on Monday morning. We'd get all our instructions from the week. The principal would give us our charges, and it was really just a good time and a big family back then. There were a lot of bright students, a lot of outstanding individuals. Well, I was in class at Manchester High, but it was an outstanding institution back then. I was really happy just to be here.
It was 1957, and the headmaster at that time was Mr. Sleggs, later replaced by Mr. German. Shortly after Mr. Sleggs left, Mr. German came. And it was a different atmosphere when Mr. German came. Everything was more lively, not as strict and, old-fashioned. Green uniform, white blouse, white socks, brown shoes or black shoes, and a beret, a green beret, with the school pin on the beret. The beret was really enforced. If students were caught on the street not wearing a beret, you would be you'd have a problem. But I know as soon as they're out of sight, they folded up the beret, put it in their pockets, especially the girls. Barry Grant, he used to come down on a special day for music, and we had to sing, and he played, and there was singing, you had to do singing. And so that was like one special day. Then my favorite teacher was Mr. Nita. Mr. Nita. And he did history, I think. I'm not sure if he did literature, but history, and he would recall these stories in history, and he would be reciting, it made it very interesting, because he would take a particular story from that time that we're dealing with, and he would be explaining it, So he seemed to have really enjoyed it, and he would get into it. We would, made it more interesting, not just reading the words in the book, but he would pull out certain incidents and elaborate on them. This club. I think Davis, I don't remember the other. Davis, okay. And then I would do high jump down that day, long jump, everything. Everything. I would do all the events on that day. The only thing I didn't do was shot put and discuss.
Between the period 1960 and 1966. And I very vividly recall the very first morning I went, I was in 3A. And I can even remember very clearly some of the persons who were in the same class like with me. I can recall Keith Smith, Michael Peart, and a number of other persons who to this day we maintain contact. Evan Duggan, who is also here, is another classmate of mine. Okay. In fact, we played cricket. In fact, we were the opening batsmen for the form team for a number of years. It was a small school population at the time, perhaps just over 200 students. And so it was more like a family atmosphere because everybody knew everybody. From first form to sixth form, everybody knew everybody. So there's a lot of influence of the older students, and discipline was a critical element of the school at that time. The school didn't have to rely on the teachers to instill discipline. The older children set the example. My headmaster was Mr. German, who has influenced the lives of so many people. He was a real leader. And every morning at devotion, he used to give an inspirational talk. And if you listen to him very carefully, it would shape, and I have no doubt that his inspirational talks have shaped the lives of all of those persons from that era. One of the things that I recall most from him, and it is something that I live by to this day, he said one day, you must always bite off more than you can chew, and then chew like hell. And that is something I've never forgotten, and I have actually tried it on a number of occasions, and it does in fact work. The teachers, they shaped the lives of students, and they instilled a level of discipline and a sense of pride and a sense of self-worth in the students. And I dare say that is one of the reasons so many of the Manchester High School students have excelled after leaving school.
Attended Manchester High School 1956 to 63. I left December 63 having completed the high school certificate. And I'll point out my class was the last for high school certificate. The following year, the whole of Jamaica switched to GCE. Roberts. And then we have the very outstanding principal, Mr. Jerry German. I left him there as principal. I think the population was about 300, and many of them, if not most of them, were children or expatriates who had come out to work at the newly opened Bauxite Company. But gradually it changed as the common entrance numbers increased, the population changed and increased also. We were the entertainment center for the town. You didn't have theaters. You had the cinemas, but no theaters. So Mrs. Stedman, who was the home economics teacher, did plays and operas. I always remember the wonderful experience of being in Aladdin and the Lamp. And there was also the Spanish play, El Sombrero de Tres Picos. These are etched in my memory. I really enjoyed being a part of them. It was, we were well-rounded and balanced. I remember having to do music appreciation every Friday evening. You had to listen to the classics, and I'm so glad for that experience. Now I can go to the performance of the RPO, Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and be so at home and appreciate the music.
Manchester High School between the years of 1960 and 1966. In 1964, I was one of the first GC class. Before that we did senior Cambridge. So my class in 1964 was the first class to have done the GC O-level exams, and then in 1966 I completed my education at Manchester High with the GC A-level exams. I went to school. I went to Manchester the first day that Headmaster Jerry German came, and he left, and I left the same year he left. It was a fascinating experience for me. I came from a small community called Hanbury, just 3 miles north of Mandeville. Could walk to school most days. I was one of the first few persons from that community who went to high school. So there was a little bit of pressure, of course, to do well, and I made good the opportunity. But I had significant assistance from the community, the school community, both my fellow students and also my teachers. The teachers were excellent teachers, and I eventually, after several years in industry, I eventually ended up in academia. And when I look back on my life, and I begin to think, where would my perspectives on life have changed? And it certainly was at Manchester High School for a number of reasons. One is that, as you know, education transforms life, and it provided me with that early education. It was great education. I believe every single thing I've done since then is attributed to that, the early education I received at Manchester School.
Went into first form in 1959, and I left sixth form in 1966. German, not only as a teacher, an administrator, but a mentor. His teaching was not only about things that you should be learning in school, but about life. And he shared his experiences with the students. The fact that he was not Jamaican also helped, because he had a world view of things that were happening and important things at the time. We were well informed, for example, about issues of politics and race in South Africa, in fact, all of Southern Africa, about issues that were taking place in Europe, about issues that had to do with politics, issues of independence as we were moving towards it at that time, and early years of independence. So what we learned from him was much more than we would have expected to have learned in the classroom. Of the school in so many areas. In sport, I played football, the Costa Cup. I played Headley Cup cricket for the school. I represented the school at the Champs at Stadium. I played table tennis for the school. I debated for the school, and I also represented the school in the school's drama festival. Proud to have played the role of Macbeth. My goodness. To critical acclaim in the newspapers at the time. In my last year in school, through a decision taken by the English teacher at the time, Mrs. Britton, my career in journalism started. She appointed me, unilaterally appointed me the editor of the school newspaper, at that time called The Wasp. And that started my interest in journalism. And journalism has been my life in many parts of the world. And here am I, teaching journalism.
Started Manchester High School, which was then Manchester Secondary School, in the year 1944. I came to the school from Bethabra Elementary School, where I got my foundation education. I stayed at Manchester School for 4 years, 1944 to 1948, during which I did both the junior Cambridge examination and the senior Cambridge examination successfully. School, Manchester School as it was in my time, was located, as you might not know, just outside the St. Mark's Church front gate. And we've always thought that it was part of the church. Sporting at Manchester was table tennis, which I learned at Manchester School. But I brought with me an exposure to cricket. And I remember once I played for Manchester School, and we played against Porus. And my cricket was untutored. It was just a natural cross bat, hit the ball type of cricket. And we played against Porus. And the Manchester team, Manchester School team, was in problems. And I went down to bat, and I lifted the first pitch for 4 runs, followed by another 4. And I must have made quite a bit in that first over. And we won the match. The scores were very low, probably 48 to 46 or something like that. But then the following match was at home at Manchester School, and the team was doing badly again. And all the boys and all the girls shouted, "Well, Alan hasn't batted yet." And so in those days, we had 1 good bat on the team. And so the other player yielded the 1 good bat to me, and I stepped down and looked around, and everybody saying that Alan is coming, Alan is coming. And I took my position, looked around again to inspect where the fields were. And the man came up with a Yorker. First ball, middle stump. And I had to put the bat under my arms and walked very sheepishly up back to that was my big experience at Manchester School cricket.
Okay. But
the discipline, the respect for teachers and adults, and for our fellow schoolmates, particularly for girls, was deeply entrenched. And I carried this through to the rest of my life. And as I view some of my schoolmates then, and to see the way they have behaved, the way they have grown in the society, I feel confident that the foundation laid then was a good one.
Okay. The school in 2nd form. I can't remember why I never went to 1st form, but for some odd reason, I came into Manchester School at 2nd form. The school was then where the taxi stand is. And I was at that school until I was in 3rd form. And I can remember very vividly the morning when we had a march, because the entrance to the St. Mark's Parish Church was at the front, where another taxi stand is. And we had a march from that school, and we marched in front of the church, and by a little passage right beside the market and the churchyard, over to where the playing field is, which was called the rectory, and then from that up the hill and up to the school. And I can remember we gathered in the auditorium at the school the morning at about 8 o'clock. And we prayed, and we had various activities in the school. I can remember one speaker at the what would you call that now? The inception or the beginning of that new school was a lady called Daisy Godfrey, right? A prominent Manchesterian. And that was in 1954. I left school in 1954. At the church service, I can remember some things being said. One of the things, but I never heard them call the name J.C. Sleggs, which was the headmaster that I went to school under. Son's an Englishman. And I left, I think, the year before Jerry German came. Let me say this. I think the school, our school motto, is something that creates almost a new human being in a child that goes into Manchester School. I think the motto, right? 6 looks, 8 looks. It let your light so shine. I think it's, to me, right, and to many other guys I've spoken to, it seemed to do something to you, especially at the beginning of a term when we have that, I don't know what they have now, but at the beginning of term when we have that service to start the year, right? It does something to you.
Started January 1960. And in 1966, I was to start sixth form when my father informed me that I was accepted to College of Arts, Science and Technology to do electrical engineering. That was to my surprise because I did not apply. So I said, I didn't apply. How come I'm accepted? He said, well, Mr. German and myself discussed the matter. And we decided that would be best for you. So I ended up at CAS doing electrical engineering. I enjoyed my time at Manchester School. In fact, probably I enjoyed myself too much. But it was a very relaxed environment. And then we had a number of expatriates as teachers here. Mr. German came with his wife, Patsy, and I think about half of the teachers who taught me were expatriate. This is a school. Remember, we had just recently started the common entrance examination. So it was a kind of transition period. It was before that, to be quite frank, an elite school, where most of the local population couldn't get access. You couldn't afford to come to Manchester School. So I was part of the transition, where you had the mix of the elites with ordinary Jamaicans who were successful in the common entrance and getting here. It was a little friction because we were looked down upon as a poor class coming into the school. But Mr. German, no.
Yes, tell us about that part.
Mr. German, who came from Knox, Knox College. Mr. German came with a brand new image of what the school should be. It should serve the community. And in fact, as you mentioned about being holistic, he introduced practical things like woodwork and things like that into the school. And tried to find a niche. Everybody could find some kind of a niche to fit into the school, to at least leave with something. And in fact, his emphasis was for the children to come to school, regardless of whether they could afford it or not. He found influence on me. He tried with me, let me tell you, because as I said, I enjoyed school here and I gave a lot of trouble. And in fact, I can tell you that my most embarrassing experience with Mr. German is when my teacher sends me to the principal for indiscipline, which usually being at the back of the class giving trouble. And Mr. German would tell me to go and stand in the middle of the holy ground. Now that was my worst experience at school here, to stand out there for about a half an hour or an hour, and everybody passing and looking at you, standing out there. 1989, I was appointed the chairman of the school. And the school wasn't doing very well at the time. There was no funds available, and the infrastructure was run down, and we had to do some good work to get things going again. And I think I set the foundation for the school to take off. I remember when Charlie Fuller, the athletics guru from Manchester, said that Manchester school could win the girls' champs if we did the right thing. So we sat down and worked out what to be done. We put it in place for a 5-year program, and we won it after the 3rd year.
I was there from 58 to 63. As a young man going to Manchester, I went there at age 11, and I left at about 17, thereabouts. So all those years, there were fun years, there were challenging years sometimes. You get in trouble, but you had a lot of fun, and you got attached to the school. Beach in St. Elizabeth. I was one of the fortunate few who took the scholarships in 1957 and was given a scholarship which allowed me to attend either Manchester, Monroe or Clarendon. And my mother decided I would go to Manchester with perhaps, and I don't want to have our current headmasters or subsequent headmasters feel that I'm slighting them in any way, but in my mind, I don't think anyone can match Jerry German.
What was the about Mr. German? I keep hearing this from all of those.
Jerry German came to Manchester. Remember, I just described Mr. Sleggs as being stiff and basically removed from the students. Mr. German came there and liberated us. Basically, he liberated us. The first thing he did, that the boys loved, of course, he abolished caning. And he would talk to you when you were sent to his office for disciplinary reasons. He would have a conversation, and he would search into your thoughts. Why do you behave that way? Why did you do that? And if you can justify your action, he lets you off the hook. He exposed us to knowledge which was denied us as Jamaicans in the high school setting. Mr. German introduced us to the Morant Bay Rebellion. He introduced us to Vidia Naipaul. We had to read about Stony Gut and Paul Bogle and George William Gordon. It was a liberation of our thinking. And he allowed us a lot of space to be ourselves. But when we go outside of that barrier, he would bring us back extremely proud. I always brag about my school. And I get laughed at sometimes by the boys from the Kingston schools, because I move around a lot of them. And, oh, you come from a country school. Well, I always tell them it's one of the best schools in Jamaica. And I'm very happy to see that there is some recognition being given to past students. And I'm sure those of us who have been selected this time is just a small part of the overall achievements of Manchester School graduates. Some of them we probably haven't heard of. Some of them in fields we never dreamt of. And I think this is a wonderful idea. I feel very honored. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, I was honored by the St. Elizabeth Homecoming Foundation, and I didn't come to that event. And I'm coming to this one. I'm here in Jamaica for this one because I really didn't want to miss this. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some of those boys and girls, middle-aged men and women who went to school with me that I haven't seen maybe in 50 years.
I started out at Manchester High School in January 1963, having passed half scholarship from Alligator Pond Primary School down in the south. And then I had transferred to Mandeville Primary, and I can remember thinking to myself, when I saw the young ladies in the green and white uniform, that's the school I want to go to. That's the school I want. So I was more than elated when I got through to go to Manchester. The atmosphere at high school was so very different from primary school, because first thing is that when I went to Manchester High School, I was faced with a timetable. I've never seen a timetable in my life before. And at primary school, we had one teacher. At Manchester School, we had 3, 4, 5, 6 teachers even in first form. And I went into 7B, and that time 7B was at the front of the auditorium. I don't know what it's called now, but that top auditorium, it has a different name now. And that's where we were for my first year in high school, which turned out to be 2 terms, because that is the year they changed from January to September of the school year. So I only spent 2 terms in first form. Yay! That's because I was bright. To have to still see Mr. German, because he was such a tremendous impact on my life at school. And of course, Iris Whittaker. Iris was fabulous. Iris
She was there from in the 30s, I think she went, and I know she did music.
Yes, yes. She herself was a past student, and I think she left and went to another school and then came back as a teacher. And she taught me English language in second form. She taught me drama. She taught me music. To this day, I still sing, "The hills are alive." Mrs. Whittaker, that's Mrs. Whittaker. And
high school was great. I entered in 1947 in Form 2A and had 5 beautiful years. At that time, our classes were only 20. The limit was 20 per form. Discipline was very strong, though. All the girls had to wear their jippy-japper hats to school, and if you walked through the town without your hat, then you would be suspended from school. We tried to live up to the motto, sick look at looks, and we were always mindful of what we would eventually achieve in life. School always began with devotion. And right now I can remember those beautiful hymns that we used to sing. After devotion, we would all go to our classrooms, and break time was always fun. We used to have a restaurant nearby the school there, Palace Restaurant, and we could sneak out at break time and get some sort of cookies. And the boys were always fun, because we had a guy in the class who could always whistle without the teacher knowing who was whistling. And that sometimes gave us a lot of fun, because the teacher would stop and say, "Who is singing?" He could never tell who it was. So school was fun.
Manchester High School shaped leaders, and I do not believe that the school selected leaders, selected persons, and then shaped them. I think Manchester High School gave every student an opportunity. Strong focus on democracy. You had to argue a position. There was always a lot of respect. I remember with fond memories a headmaster called Jerry German. I remember we advocated for half-day school. Our school should finish at 2, and he said, fine, timetable it. These are the requirements of the Ministry of Education, and if you can timetable it, we can do it. So we learned very quickly that everything was possible. You had to have a shot at it. The school had programs going at the time that allowed each student, irrespective of your background, to leave the school at a certain level, everybody at a certain level. I don't think we had the opportunity to feel marginalized in any way. I graduated from school. Mr. Gunter was the headmaster. I got married a few months after high school, and I went to work. And eventually I ended up in a bank, and that's where he had his account. I dreaded him coming into the bank, because he was always coming over to ask, when are you going to university? And eventually the application form was collected by either himself or Mrs. Gunter, taken to the bank, and then they kept asking, when are you giving it back to me? So eventually I made my application to university, and I went in University of the West Indies. That's where I did all my studies. First degree, I got an Alcan scholarship for postgraduate studies, went straight through to a PhD, and then subsequently did an MBA, because I did the sciences, and conversation with persons, persons in finance and so on, was quite difficult, and I thought, okay, I need to learn the language just as well. I believe that, however, Manchester School prepared you for life. I do not believe anybody who graduates from Manchester High finds excuses for failures. You get up and you go.